This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always was, always will be.
Tansei, hello. My name is Shayla Stonechild, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Every week on the show, I share stories of Indigenous women from Turtle Island and beyond to challenge the mainstream narrative around Indigenous identity and offer up a new category of role models so that the next generations may thrive. We'll put a spotlight on issues facing Indigenous women and explore how we can reclaim our voice, our body, and our spirit and our power that have been silenced and stolen throughout history and humanity. If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe on the platform of your choice. Now, let's get to this week's conversation. I'm your host, Shayla Stonechild, and I'm super excited to be here with guest Nikki Sanchez. Nikki is a Maya and Irish-Scottish academic, Indigenous media maker, and environmental educator. Nikki holds a master's degree in Indigenous governance and is presently completing a PhD with a research focus on emerging visual media technology as it relates to Indigenous ontology. She designed and directed the first ever Indigenous Storyteller Edition with TELUS Story Hive, a project to provide funding and mentorship for 30 emerging Indigenous filmmakers in BC and Alberta. I first met Nikki on the first official photo and video shoot for the Matriarch Movement back in November, I believe. What year was that now? Like 2020? Was it 20? That feels so long ago.
Pre-COVID. All I know is that it was before COVID changed the world forever.
It changed the world,
Yeah.
Seriously. But I actually was familiar with Nikki's work on Vice, and also just her talk on TED Talks for Decolonization is for Everyone. And so I was really a big admirer of Nikki's work beforehand. And then when the shoot happened, I was just like, finally, I could meet you in person. And yeah, you were just like really humble and inspiring to be around too, just being with, I feel like, that matriarchal energy, that women empowerment energy. It was nice to be around. So thank you. Hi, Nikki, for coming on the podcast today.
Plas Kamadi, Kwale Tlanatzik, Nimitz Plas Kamadi, Niwan Hiwan Tatlok. I'm so happy to be here.
I know I asked you this question on the shoot, but like, what does the word matriarch mean to you?
That's something I've been thinking a lot about. For a really long time, like matriarch really to me meant like, like abuelitas and cookums and like our wise female elders. But more and more, I feel like matriarchy is a state of like being and becoming. And as we grow, and like I use the term like women and non-binary and two-spirit, like as we grow as life givers and we begin to tend to the life around us, I think that is the becoming of matriarchy. So I think that we are always like coming into our matriarchy, and there's many phases of it, but I really see like even like little ones, that moment that they have self-awareness that they need to take care of like ones who are littler than them, or that they need to like be gentle with an animal, like that. I feel like that process of tending to life and caring for life is the process of matriarchy.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I agree. I feel like there's this term called like matriarch in the making. I feel like I still have so much wisdom to learn and to embody before I can really, I don't think people just call themselves matriarchs. Like it's something that is like passed down or like given to you for the work that you do. Speaking about the work that you do, I know you wear many hats, but like I'm curious to know about the start of your journey. What was your childhood like? And was it always a passion of yours to be doing the work that you're currently doing now? Or when did that kind of start to happen for you?
I was born in the middle of like revolution and genocide in my home territory. Both of my parents were very involved in the revolution and protecting my father's people and homeland. So I have never not like lived an existence that has been acutely aware of like land and life and like, you know, even like being able to speak our language or keep our names. So yeah, it's always, I guess, like there's definitely been stages in my life when I've really tried to run away from that and like, be anything else and, you know, not it's painful. It's really painful and it's hard work. And it's personal. So there's definitely been like teenage moments of trying to run away and, you know, become a model or do something silly like that. But for most of my life, it's really, you know, colonization has really shaped my life, especially as a displaced person. Like my indigeneity comes from the South, and I've spent the majority of my life here on Lekwungen territories. And so I've always been acutely aware of like not only indigeneity, but indigeneity in diaspora and how colonization has moved Indigenous people like into different parts of our territories and off of our territories and separated us from our homelands as well. Like it's for me, returning to my homelands is not an easy thing to do.
Right. Well, that was gonna lead to my next question is like, how do you remain rooted to your like culture, your identity, your roots in like a fast-paced, you know, evolving world? People talk about decolonization, and I feel like that word has essentially lost its meanings kind of in a way because it's just taken other forms. And so yeah, how do you remain rooted and true to your roots and your authenticity? And then the next question would be like, what does decolonization mean to you?
I'm gonna flip and answer in the opposite direction. So
Yeah, do
just
it.
because it makes more sense in my mind. So colonization, I believe I'm quoting Glenn Coulthart, but colonization is not an event, right? Like it was never one thing that happened. Colonization is a series of events that continue and change form and, you know, change through policy and change through publicity. But colonization, like since its onset, has never ended. It has only continued and changed its many masks and its many guises. Like I would argue that even right now, colonization is masquerading as reconciliation here in Canada.
Right.
And so, in that exact same way, decolonization is a process. Like, it's not an event. Like, you can't decolonize. Like, I try to decolonize, but if I don't practice decolonization, I like there's the system is I live in a colonial system. And so if I'm not constantly acting against the forces of that colonization, then I am becoming part of the colonial system. So for me, decolonization is like daily acts of resistance and daily acts of defiance. And like just for me, just like choosing to use my language, I'm not a language speaker, I'm like a language learner, and I would be like a kindergarten language learner if I was going to be classified in that way. But I insist on using my language because it makes people uncomfortable to remember that there's other languages that are spoken. It makes people uncomfortable not to have English be the dominant language in the room and to have their worldview catered to. Um, and so, yeah, there's lots of ways that I practice decolonization, but it's a constant, like it is constantly like a battle of self-awareness and like really holding myself accountable because there's other days where it's like, you know, I'm tired and, you know, I'll like consume media or I'll consume food that is really problematic. And,
Mhm.
unless I'm constantly self-aware in that way and practicing that resistance, it just becomes so the
Mhm.
forces of colonization and globalization are so powerful that it's really difficult, So I give everyone props. Um, to who like because I know we're all working at it, and it's a process, and I don't think like, I can't wait for the day that we're no longer having to put all of our energy towards decolonizing, and we can actually be focused on indigenizing. And I think for some
Mhm.
folks, like, that's where they are, folks who have grown up
Mhm.
in their communities, folks who, have access to their lands and their language and their ceremonies. They, get to do the work of indigenizing and carrying the culture forward, and I think for folks like me, who are displaced, like, my work is decolonizing and my work is making space um, so that the people who are closer to the fire have that ability to indigenize.
I think you touched on a really big point, and that's just like we can come to a place of burnout. I feel like burnout for me has been the leading cause of why I'm not like on the front lines or I'm not going out. It's because like I'm literally so tired just from holding online
Yeah.
space that I can barely hold space for myself. And so when people are, trying to decolonize or indigenize things, what are things when you are feeling completely burnt out that bring you back to your power and allow you to reclaim like your authenticity and your health,
Mhm.
really? Like, so you don't keep burning yourself out. Do you have practices that keep you
I
balanced?
do, and, like, I wanna be really real with everyone that, that too is a practice, and, like, I have coping mechanisms, and I have wellness practices, and, at different times, I reach for different things, and um I just really want to be authentic with, um, everyone who hears this, that they know that,
Mhm.
sometimes our survival looks like our coping mechanisms, and that's okay. Like, we don't survive
Mhm. Yeah.
500 years of
Well, and I
genocide
think that's
and
like
get to, walk away and just have, make perfect life choices. So, for me,
right.
on the days where I can access what self-care looks like, for me, that looks like being on the land. It looks like, um, singing my songs, singing songs that have been given to me, using medicine, and ceremony if I have access to it. And then, I take those
Mhm.
things into my, daily life in little bits so that they're really accessible and I can practice them every day. So, I'll sing my water song in the shower,
Mm.
and yeah, I'll when I am out, just taking my dog for a walk or going to meet someone for coffee, I'll speak to the land in the language of this land,
Mm.
of Sinchothan here, or if I'm up west, in Nechalath, I'll speak to the animals in their language and just recognize things. So
Mhm.
I embed those little practices that maybe nobody else would even notice that I'm doing them, but for me, they're ways to
Mhm.
reconnect and remind myself that,
Mhm.
I am more than just, a consumer, individual, capital entity, but that I am part of an
Mhm.
interconnected web of life, and that I'm, spirit just as much as I am a
Mhm.
body. And those things,
Mhm.
those little things actually, just those little moments of grace sometimes are the things that, powerfully sustain me through pain and burnout.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, coming back to that relationship and that kinship in a way, like taking those moments is an act of like decolonization, resting and restoring and kind of working against the capitalistic clock that always tells us we need to be in a state of achieving and doing and
Totally, the
working.
urgency, right?
Right?
Yes, there's
Yeah,
always
that
a sense of
yeah. And also
urgency.
the like Yeah, and entitlement, I feel like a lot of entitlement out there too, that people feel entitled to your time and your energy, and you're just like,
Yeah.
"Wait, like, what is our relationship? What is our connection to one another?" Um, Going back to, your childhood, when did you so I feel like you've always this like, you grew up with, this, like, you grew up surrounded by colonization, like genocide, so it's always been in your blood to like do this work, to do decolonization. But for you, like, how I'm curious to know, how was it like literally going to school in a colonial
Mm.
system, learning those ways, and then still like, I don't know, for me, I have a lot of resistance towards working in these systems that are literally just um like forms of white supremacy, I feel like.
Totally.
So like, right, I'm just like, and so I just have so much respect that people are that are like doing the work within the system, but also I'm just like, how do you maintain that? Like, how do you maintain rooted, again, coming back to your roots,
Mhm.
um, in places and institutions like this? So like, what is I know it's not your job to like continuously educate, but like, what would your advice be to a settler that, like, how would a settler begin to decolonize?
Hoy. Like, there
Watch your TED
yeah, there's
talk.
a lot. I mean, there's a lot there. The very first thing, I mean, and this is like I wrote, like I did the 1, 2, 3 ABCs in my TED talk. So if anyone wants to begin that work, they can just go to YouTube and
Check out,
type
yeah.
in Nikki Sanchez, and
I'll
there
drop the
it is.
link.
But I think the first piece is like really knowing who you are and where you come from. And for so long, like work of diversity or inclusion or equity has always been about like, let's learn about the Cree or let's learn about like the Syrians. And it's not about like, it shouldn't always be about like learning about other people's culture and extracting from other people's culture and feeling like you have
Mm,
moral authority because you tried Ethiopian food. Like, who are you? Like, who
mm,
are your people? How did you get here? What were the political and
mhm,
economic reasons that brought you here? Who did you displace to be on the land that you're on? Like
mm,
the wealth that you've inherited, the wealth that your family holds, everything that all the privilege you've received,
mhm,
who did that come from? That doesn't come just from
mm,
anyone. It comes from something, and especially in colonized nations like the United States and Canada, it comes directly at the dispossession of the people of whose land you're on. It comes directly from their exploitation, from uh, exclusion from economy, from the very
mhm,
intentional destruction of sovereign ways of life for Indigenous people. So there's two parts of that. One is, really that healing part of reconnecting with your ancestry and your gifts and all the things that make your life story and your genealogy special and the places where you can really connect to your power and the lands, the homelands
mm,
and the home languages that like tell you who you are and about what your purpose is here and about what your gifts are. And the other piece of that is to do the reparations part of healing. Like we don't get to just come to reconciliation. If you are holding land, if you're holding property, if you're holding privilege that was acquired through genocide, through theft of children for over 100 years, through forced exclusion from economic policy, like it's not enough to
mhm.
just acknowledge that. You have to begin the work of giving it back.
I think yeah, I like how you touched on, reclaiming your power, but in a sense for white people, I feel like it's giving up some of those powers and those privileges and making space and also like making change, like literally providing action. I feel like there's a lot of talk about reconciliation, but like the government is actually putting more money into like working against truth and
Yes,
reconciliation than they are actually about like doing the calls to action.
absolutely.
I know, right? And so there's this like topic of like indigenous futurism. And I know this means something different for everyone, but if you were to define indigenous futurism to yourself, how would you
I
define it?
think for me, Indigenous futurism looks like a future that is designed, like it's defined by our sovereign and generative spirit and vision and brilliance and like what our hearts want to create and the lives that we're called to live in the ways that we want to live them, rather than our existences being shaped in response to constant colonial oppression and assault, and us merely having to fight to exist as Indigenous people, or to exist on our territories, or to have access to lands that provide, you know, our sustenance, our medicines, our water. Um, that that
Mm-hmm.
future is a future that we define not in response to oppression, but in our
Mm,
own emancipation in a transcendent way. And that's a really, really
mm,
beautiful place
mm-hmm.
to spend time dwelling and imagining like what
Mm.
that world would look like for all of us and what it would look like individually for each one of us.
Yeah, I don't even know what I would do
Right?
if I didn't have
Right?
to, right? I would feel like, "Oh my god, so much freedom, so much liberation," like, even just that thought.
And I think we have moments like I think, you know, like this is why I so love the spirit of the matriarch movement is, and I think that's why we've survived, is because we've always been able to find like those moments where we feel that spirit and we live
Mhm,
in that spirit. And it's like those moments of dwelling there is what gives us like the strength and the courage and the vision to know that it's possible. And so we keep fighting, but
mhm,
our lives shouldn't have to be
mhm.
defined by fighting.
How has this year been for you? I know the pandemic has really, changed everyone's lives in undescribable ways. I just wanna know, like, how have you been during this whole year? Like, how is school? How is your work?
This year has been one crazy ass year. And I think probably for, I mean, I can't speak for others, but I think for many of us, it's probably been like some really incredible opportunities for growth and learning, and also
Mm,
some
mhm.
deep shadow work and like really having to
Yeah.
face ourselves and face like, and when I say ourselves, I mean both ourselves as individuals and ourselves collectively as humanity, and like to really look at what we've
Mhm.
done and what we've created, and really reckon with whether we're going to allow for, like, are we going to allow for a future to exist where we just have rolling pandemics and lockdowns, and our only like access to freedom is to go consume, and we don't get to see our loved
Mhm.
ones, and we don't get to gather in ceremony, and every time we leave the house we have to wear a mask. Like, are we going to allow for that?
Mhm.
But
I
this
know.
year
Yeah.
specifically for me was really like quite powerful because I went directly from occupying the Victoria legislature with like Indigenous youth from 34 different nations. We held down the legislature for
I
February
remember,
and like
yeah.
shut down the thrones speech and made John Horgan like run through tunnels like a little rat to hide from us because he didn't want to face up to his political decisions or accountability. And so, and like when I'm talking about Indigenous futurisms, for that month, we created what the future could look like. We were in, you know,
Mm,
we had a sacred fire going 24 hours a day. We were
mhm,
feeding people, we were caring for people. Like we had so many people come out to support us, and we had so many young people
mhm,
like come together and become family. And we had so many like healers and medicine people come and do ceremony, and like we created that future. We lived in that future, and it felt so good. Um
I I remember seeing photos, and I arrived there like the day after everyone
Oh
like
no.
left. I was like, no. But yeah, I remember seeing photos of it, and I think I messaged you, wanted to meet up, but yeah. Um that was like a really good moment, even just seeing it online, seeing all the support from everyone. And when you hold down like legislator buildings, like in Vancouver, sometimes there'll be call out for things to support. But what do you think is the best way for people to support during that time?
During those times, like I think for
Yeah.
non-Indigenous folks, it's your body and your political power and your financial power, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you can't actually, if you've got kids and you've got like a full-time job, send money. If you have
Mm-hmm.
time and you have the ability, like get your body down there. If you have political power
Mm-hmm.
or influence, if you're a lawyer, if you work, in government, like utilize that power in solidarity. Um, we saw a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that. Like we saw a lot of people really wanting um to step out and really support us and just being afraid of what the consequences would be. And I think that's another place where it's like where we talk about allyship, right? Like you can be an ally all you want on a sunny day on Instagram, but what does it look like when it's hailing in
True.
February and people are asking you to come and put your body on the line at 1 a.m., right? Like what kind of ally are you? And so
Mm-hmm.
those are times like because the way in which two like white bodies are going to be treated by the police is so different than the way that two spirit young Indigenous bodies are going to be treated by the police. And so like for
Mm-hmm.
you it's just going to be like a trip, you're going to get a car ride in a van, maybe get processed, maybe get held. For our young people, you're going to get physically assaulted, you're going to get like emotionally tormented, and you're going to be processed, and you're going to be given like you're going to be put in the legal system that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. So, like, and I
Mm-hmm.
think most people know, like, I say this a lot. There's so many different ways to be an activist, and it doesn't mean that you need to put your body on the front line, but you know what your gifts are. We had people send down like
Mm-hmm.
cases of wild salmon, like, mothers who couldn't be there, but sent down like cases of wild salmon, and people who sent down medicines and like healers who made tinctures. And there's so many ways, like, you don't, and if you have trauma and you can't be on the front line, that's okay, but there's so many other
Mm-hmm.
ways to be there in spirit and in solidarity, and even virtually, right, amplifying that
Mm-hmm.
message. And our
Yeah,
story, like,
totally.
it was a story that we had German press and we had French press telling that story when Canadian press wasn't even telling that story. We had
No, no,
European
like
press telling that story.
I really like how you highlighted that you can support and be like, do some sort of activism regardless of what your role is within society. How can people support your work now and what you're doing?
I like my passion, and my like what's been my side hustle for almost 7 years now is a collective called Decolonize Together. That is, we actually do our work actually is decolonial education, and we run workshops,
Mhm.
and we'll like do everything from like a 1 day workshop to like a 2 year process with different organizations. That's how the Story Hive Indigenous like Creators Edition was created, was working really in depth with Story Hive and going through a whole decolonial process with them, and seeing their commitment to want to support Indigenous creatives, and them taking all of their knowledge and their skills and their power and their financial ability and co-creating a program that was really like accessible, empowering, and culturally relevant for Indigenous creators. And it was such a huge success. I'm actually going to cry because Taryn was part of that program. And like
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
if anyone wants to watch his film, they can, like, on Story Hive, and that's, like, a really beautiful
Mhm.
piece of him that will live forever, and I'm really, really happy
Mhm.
that he was able to make that and share that with the world before he left us.
Mhm. Yeah, like, yeah, I'm gonna start crying too. I was really close to Taryn too. So like, yeah, his death really hit us all. But I think that just shows the power behind telling our own stories and, content creating and using our voices as Indigenous people, because that shows like your spirit will live on in those stories and in those videos and in all that music, whatever you're doing to create.
Totally.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Hands up to
Yeah.
Taryn for blessing us
Yes.
with his
I
presence
hope
while
we
he
can
was
put
here. It was
that link
very,
the link to his video too on this podcast because it's
yeah.
so beautiful and, like, his spirit is in it, and it just, like, is I watched it many times since he passed, and, we do get to live forever, when we share our art with the world,
Hmm.
we share our words, we
Yeah.
get to live forever, and, that's a really
Mhm.
beautiful little piece, of his work that I just cherish.
I'm really happy that we could connect on this podcast and we hopefully can connect in real life. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your space and for sharing your time on here. If you have any closing remarks where people can follow you and support you.
Yeah, I think the thing I really want to say, Shayla, is just like to really hold my hands up to you and say Kualitlas Kamadi and recognize like your courage and the energy that you put into putting positivity out through the virtual channels that we have access to. And it's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at matriarch.movement, and don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.